type of editing before this.
Okay, Wilson.
You ready?
What will we be working on today?
Today we will be disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling the Benford Model 5200 needle scaler.
Okay.
So, first things first, we're going to take off the needle assembly. So, clamp this in as so. Disengage the spring. Inside you can see you have your needles that are in this assembly and your spring. Spring goes in first, needles fit right on top like so. Next we will take out the hammer assembly. There's a spring here, I'll show you. Put it this way you can see it. Here's your spring. You pull back on this, that retracts the locking mechanism that holds your hammer in place. Troubleshooting, sometimes if it's not working, this piece, if you have too much pressure, will shear off here, and you might not. That can be one of the problems that happens with these, is this piece right here comes off. Keep that in mind. Once you get that off, you can put this in your vise, and then we'll take off the top portion of this. There's a jam nut here that you have to loosen first. Get the jam nut out. Then we will take off this piece. This is your air assembly inside here. And this comes off. Another troubleshooting, if you're not getting good action out of your needle gun, make sure that you're actually getting airflow through here. If you're having an issue getting air out of here, when you push this and you get no air, you might need to take this screw out and disassemble your air assembly in there and clean that. This one's working. Once you get that off, this is the body of the needle scaler. Inside here you have two washers that look like that sit one on top of the other, and then your valve assembly. We'll be taking this apart and cleaning this in a moment. There's your valve assembly. This is the needle scaler body. This is all one piece. It does not come apart down here, only unscrews up here. Inside there's a sleeve and another it's almost like a piston. So this piston comes out. This rides up and down inside this valve assembly. This is another troubleshooting. If this doesn't have enough lubrication in it, this piston will not ride up and down inside here. So you want to make sure that you have a nice thin film of oil that this rides up and down. So inside here, this piston sits. There's a sleeve, and there's a couple ports on the side of this sleeve. And that's the only this is the only moving part inside this is this piston here. So you want to make sure you got a nice thin coat of oil inside there, and then this piece can slide back down inside. And it is very tight tolerances, and this should be able to slide up and down inside once you get it engaged. Sometimes you gotta tap it in, but it should be free to slide up and down inside there. If it's not moving when you tip it, it doesn't have enough lubrication. Next is our valve assembly. There's some very small ports inside here that the air passes through, and they can get gummed up with rust and dirt. If you have too much, if you got too much oil, it will get gummed up in there, and that's usually the main problem with the needle gun. So you want to make sure all those ports are clean. So to take this apart, you want a thin, something thin to get in between there, and you want to just slowly start working it apart. Once you get it started, that slides off. I'll just grab a new one. So that slides off, and you have the two halves of your valve assembly. These holes, it matters which side which side fit into these roll pins, because these ports have to match up. So if you don't have these in the right, if the ports aren't matching up, these need to go in those holes, then you won't get the airflow through here. So when you put it back together, it's important that your ports match up when you set these down. So we have a spare valve. In between these two halves of the valve assembly is the actual valve. It's a thin metal disc that looks like this. So that it's important that this piece goes back and it sits right here like that. And we match up our ports, which are these holes, go into those holes. You'll know when you're putting it back together if it's right, if the holes sit right on top of each other. So we're good to go. And before we put it back together, that's when you want to make sure that you clean all these ports out. I've already done it, but you want to make sure all these ports are clear. There's no gunk and grit down in there. You want to spray it out with brake cleaner and then spray it out with air, so you have no obstructions in the ports. This goes back together nice and tight. See your valve inside the bottom there. It's important that that disc goes back in. Put that back in, put your washers back in, then you can put your air assembly back together. Next thing is important to make sure, and this is tightened down very tight. Otherwise you'll get air leaking by and you won't get good power out of your needle scaler. Jam nut goes on next, and that needs to be tightened down as well. Then you're ready to put your hammer piece back in. That only goes in one way, so that's important too. If you're not getting it, you gotta just rotate it till you get it the right way. Now we're ready for the needles. There's the needle scaler reassembled, and now we'll test it. There's your working needle scaler. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Wilson.